Ron Howard has spent more than 6 decades in Hollywood, long enough to watch brilliance rise, fade, and return in unexpected shapes. From a 6-year-old kid standing beside Andy Griffith to a veteran director quietly observing the strongest and weakest instincts of actors, he learned early that talent alone never guarantees truth on screen. The lessons that shaped him didn't come from awards or studio power. They came from 7 performers who changed the way he saw humanity, craft, and himself. Some challenged him, some protected him, and some revealed emotional depths he never expected to witness. These are the actors who stayed with him long after the cameras stopped rolling. Russell Crowe. When Ron Howard first walked into pre-production meetings for A Beautiful Mind in 2000, he already knew Russell Crowe's reputation. The stories floated around Hollywood like warnings: brilliant, volatile, obsessive, impossible to predict. Howard had built his career on calm, on sets where collaboration mattered more than ego, yet he sensed immediately that Crowe was different. Not dangerous, not hostile, but carrying a storm of intensity that most directors tried to avoid. What Howard discovered instead was an actor whose commitment bordered on self-destruction, someone who didn't simply play John Nash, but inhabited him until the line between performance and reality blurred. Crowe arrived on set with months of research tattooed into his mind. He'd spoken to mathematicians, visited psychiatric hospitals, and studied schizophrenia with the precision of a surgeon preparing for life-or-death work. Howard watched him closely, realizing that Crowe wasn't fighting for control of the film. He was fighting for honesty. Every rewrite, every debate about camera placement, every moment of resistance came from a place of fierce protection over the truth he was trying to express. Some days, Crowe's intensity made the set feel like a pressure cooker. Scenes slowed, tempers tightened, and Howard had to steady the atmosphere without breaking Crowe's emotional momentum. It was a delicate dance, guiding a fire without extinguishing it. But what stayed with Howard wasn't the difficulty. It was the vulnerability Crowe allowed himself to reveal. In the quiet hours after a take, when the crew reset and the noise died down, Howard often saw a man exhausted by how deeply he had gone into another human's suffering. Crowe wasn't afraid to look terrified, fragmented, or lost. He didn't try to appear heroic. He let the character unravel him, and Howard understood that few actors were capable of that kind of emotional courage. Tom Hanks. Ron Howard has often said that Tom Hanks didn't simply act in his films, he stabilized them. Their first collaboration on Splash in 1984 seemed innocent at the time, just a quirky comedy built around a young actor known mostly for humor. But Howard noticed something unusual beneath Hanks's charm, an emotional steadiness that grounded every scene he touched. While other actors chased intensity, Hanks carried humanity. He didn't dominate the room. He anchored it, turning chaos into clarity with a quiet authenticity that Howard instantly recognized as rare. By the time they reunited for Apollo 13 in 1995, Hanks had evolved into the kind of performer whose presence changed the entire energy of a production. Howard didn't need to give long speeches or complicated direction. A nod, a small gesture, even a shift in breath was enough for Hanks to recalibrate an entire emotional beat. That kind of intuition wasn't just convenient, it was life-saving on a movie where precision mattered more than spectacle. Howard watched Hanks portray astronaut Jim Lovell not as a larger-than-life hero, but as a man holding his fear together because others needed him to. The restraint, the quiet leadership, the subtle heartbreak, those were choices Hanks made instinctively, and Howard understood how rare it was for an actor to trust simplicity over theatrics. Their partnership grew into a language built on mutual respect. In 5 films together, Hanks became the one actor Howard never had to worry about. There were no ego-driven demands, no battles over script changes, no emotional volatility creeping into the workday. Hanks showed up prepared, present, and willing to carry the emotional weight of a scene without ever overshadowing his castmates. Howard valued that more than he ever openly admitted. After decades on sets where tension could ignite unexpectedly, Hanks gave him something he seldom experienced: stability. Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton entered Ron Howard's life like a burst of electricity. Unpredictable, unfiltered, and unlike any performer Howard had worked with up to that point. When they collaborated on Night Shift in 1982, Howard was still finding his footing as a young director. His instinct was to keep the production orderly, to shape scenes carefully, to make choices with deliberate clarity. But Keaton threatened every system Howard relied on, not with hostility, but with a wild, restless creativity that refused to stay inside the lines. Keaton treated the script like a springboard rather than a roadmap. He arrived on set with pockets full of improvised lines, risky comedic ideas, and physical gestures that seemed chaotic until Howard realized they were all choices rooted in character, not self-indulgence. The first few days felt overwhelming. Keaton's mind worked faster than Howard could direct, shifting tones and rhythms in ways that were both exhilarating and terrifying. Yet slowly, Howard began to see the pattern in the madness. Keaton wasn't ignoring direction. He was searching, digging, and refusing to accept the first version of a moment when he sensed a better one waiting just beneath it. The real breakthrough came during a simple scene that suddenly expanded into 17 different variations, each one entirely unique. Howard watched, stunned, as Keaton moved from broad comedy to quiet sincerity without ever losing the emotional core of the character. In that moment, Howard realized he wasn't just directing an actor, he was learning from one. Keaton revealed a truth Howard hadn't yet internalized. Sometimes the best moments on screen aren't the ones a director meticulously builds, but the ones that erupt when an actor is allowed to run toward the unexpected. Keaton also taught Howard something deeper about vulnerability. Behind the manic energy was a performer capable of sudden, disarming depth. One minute he could make the entire set erupt in laughter, and the next he could deliver a line that felt fragile and painfully human. That duality expanded Howard's understanding of casting and storytelling. It showed him that comedy and sadness aren't opposites. They're intertwined, breathing through each other. Ed Harris. Ed Harris entered Ron Howard's world during Apollo 13, but he approached the project with a seriousness that felt closer to an engineer than an actor. Where Michael Keaton thrived on chaos and spontaneity, Harris worked like a craftsman laying brick, each detail locked into place with unwavering precision. Howard quickly learned that Harris didn't simply memorize lines, he absorbed systems. He studied NASA manuals, spoke to flight directors, analyzed mission protocol, and internalized every technical rhythm of Gene Kranz, until the character existed in him the way muscle memory exists in an athlete. What struck Howard early was Harris's refusal to compromise. Many actors would skim the surface of technical jargon, banking on charisma to carry them through. Harris insisted on understanding every circuit, every command procedure, every consequence of every line he spoke. It wasn't pedantic, it was discipline. And that discipline gave Howard something priceless: absolute reliability. On a set full of complex technical choreography, where one misstep could force hours of resets, Harris was the one person who never faltered. Every take was grounded, focused, and delivered with the calm authority of someone who had prepared far beyond what the script demanded. Howard admired that level of commitment because it mirrored the way he approached directing. Structure, clarity, and truth mattered to both of them. But what stayed with Howard wasn't just Harris's preparation. It was the quiet intensity simmering beneath it. Even when portraying a man defined by control, Harris's eyes carried the weight of someone who understood the stakes of human fragility. That emotional undercurrent came from a place Howard didn't direct. It was simply who Harris was. Denzel Washington. Ron Howard has never directed Denzel Washington, yet Denzel influenced him more deeply than many actors he worked with face to face. Howard spent years watching Washington from afar, studying his performances, examining the choices he made, and observing how the screen seemed to bend toward him even when he barely moved. It was a strange kind of mentorship, one Howard never asked for, but kept returning to like a filmmaker trying to understand a mystery that couldn't be solved with technique alone. In an industry often dominated by noise and outsized personalities, Washington showed him a different kind of power, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but quietly commands it. Howard noticed something early in Washington's career. Denzel never chased intensity for its own sake. His strength lived in stillness, in the weight of his pauses, in the way he let silence linger until the audience leaned forward without even realizing it. That restraint fascinated Howard. He knew how hard it was for actors to resist the instinct to perform, to push emotion outward so viewers wouldn't miss it. Washington did the opposite. He pulled everything inward, allowing audiences to feel something without being told what to feel. Howard spent decades directing talented actors, but even he understood that what Washington possessed couldn't be taught. What moved Howard even more was Washington's seamless shift between power and vulnerability. In Glory, in Malcolm X, in countless roles across decades, Washington carried a moral weight that felt unshakable. Yet he could break it open in a single moment, revealing pain or tenderness without losing dignity. That balance struck Howard deeply because he knew how fragile it was. Very few performers could portray authority without arrogance or vulnerability without weakness. Washington mastered both. Studying him changed the way Howard approached his own actors. He learned to give them more space, to trust the quiet moments, to understand that truth didn't always require volume. Washington reminded him that presence wasn't about filling a frame, it was about grounding it. And even though they never built a film together, Howard often said that watching Denzel Washington work was like attending a master class from a distance, one that shaped his directing philosophy in ways the audience would never see but Howard would never forget. Brühl. Daniel Brühl wasn't the kind of actor Ron Howard expected to transform a film. When Howard began developing Rush in 2012, the spotlight naturally fell on the glamour, danger, Voss swagger of Formula One racing. He knew the story needed emotional depth, but he didn't yet know where it would come from. Then Brühl walked in, quiet, analytical, almost understated, and Howard quickly realized he was witnessing a different kind of power. Brühl didn't try to impress anyone in the room. He simply began discussing Niki Lauda with such precision, such empathy, that Howard felt as if the real Lauda had briefly stepped into the audition. What distinguished Brühl wasn't grand emotion or star charisma. It was discipline, almost frightening in its intensity. He spent months studying Lauda's distinct Austrian cadence, his rigid posture, the clipped, brutally honest way he spoke. He watched hours of race footage, dissecting the man beneath the legend. By the time cameras rolled, even Niki Lauda himself admitted that Brühl's performance felt uncannily accurate. Howard was stunned. He wasn't just directing an actor portraying a historical figure. He was directing someone who had disappeared inside another human being. What impressed Howard even more was Brühl's refusal to soften Lauda's rough edges. In Hollywood, characters are often polished to make them more sympathetic. Brühl refused. He portrayed Lauda exactly as he was, cold, logical, sometimes harsh, driven by a mind that valued truth over comfort. Howard admired that courage. Many actors fear being disliked. Brühl feared misrepresentation. That commitment taught Howard something profound about international performers, how their training often emphasizes accuracy over audience approval. Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins was the final piece of Ron Howard's education as a director, not through conflict or collaboration, but through the quiet shock of witnessing mastery from a distance. Howard had spent years studying Hopkins's performances frame by frame, trying to understand how an actor could convey entire landscapes of emotion with almost no movement at all. When Howard finally had the chance to observe him closely during Hollywood events and industry panels in the late 1990s and early 2000s, he realized he wasn't simply watching a gifted performer. He was watching someone who had stripped acting down to its purest, most unforgiving form, truth, without ornament. Hopkins prepared for roles in ways that fascinated Howard. Instead of chasing emotion, he chased clarity. He memorized lines hundreds of times, not to appear technically flawless, but to erase hesitation until the words became instinct. Howard understood how rare that level of discipline was. Most actors either overthink or overreach. Hopkins did neither. When the cameras rolled, he wasn't performing. He was existing inside the character with complete stillness, allowing the smallest shift of his eyes to carry more meaning than an entire monologue delivered by someone else. Howard often said that watching Hopkins changed him more than directing some actors ever did. Hopkins revealed the power of restraint, the danger of over-directing, and the importance of stepping back when the actor's internal compass is already pointed towards something true. Howard realized that the greatest gift a director can give is space. Space for brilliance to breathe, space for silence to speak. What moved Howard most was Hopkins's humility. Despite his legendary status, he never behaved like a man protecting a legacy. He kept searching, kept refining, kept allowing himself to be fragile on camera. That vulnerability taught Howard that greatness isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, it's controlled. It's brave enough to do less while trusting the audience to feel more. Ron Howard's journey wasn't shaped by fame or awards, but by the 7 actors who quietly altered the way he understood storytelling, discipline, and human truth. Each one left a mark on him, some through intensity, some through steadiness, and others through the kind of quiet brilliance that stays with a director long after the set goes dark. Their lessons became the foundation of his career, and the reason he still believes acting is one of the most fragile, courageous crafts in Hollywood. Which of these 7 performances made the strongest impression on you? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more untold stories from behind the scenes of Hollywood's greatest careers.